number one is always try and find a way to move your body, because I think when we move our bodies, we start to distract our minds and we focus on our physical body, and it gives us some space to take away from our maybe constant rumination or things that are going on.
The Tune Creators Podcast is brought to you by the Tune Creators Club, our premier membership site for emerging artists looking to turn their music side hustle into a full-time gig. As a member, you get access to 30 social media content ideas every month, special discounts from our partners on products and services you use, weekly masterclasses and Q&A sessions with music industry experts, a supportive community of like-minded musicians like you, and so much more. And best of all, the Tune Creators Club is free to join. We'll even throw in a $50 sign-up credit, 30 free social media posts, and 10 awesome freebies to get you started. So what you waiting for? Head over to tunecreators.com to join, or click the link in the description below. And now, on to the podcast. Welcome to the show, Leyla. It's an absolute pleasure having you on today.
Xavi, it's so exciting being on your show. Obviously, you're my podcast producer, so I feel really honored that you've invited me on to speak with you today.
I am, same here. This is so cool because, I'm, like you said, I'm normally the one behind the scenes of your podcast, but now I'm interviewing you. So this is very, very cool. It feels good being in this, this city. So, obviously, we've been working for some time now. You do a very important job, which is working on people's mental health. You're in the mental health and wellness industry, and I know that's something a lot of musicians struggle with due to many pressures in the industry, and I can't wait to dive into what we're going to talk about today. But before we get started, I'm going to kick things off with a question I asked all my guests, and who is your favorite musical artist and why?
Oh gosh, and that's a hard question, isn't it? Because there's so many people at different times. And Xavi, I did a recent podcast around music that boosts your mental health, and I shared a playlist with people. And when you ask me that question, my mind always goes, actually, even though I have lots of favorite musicians, but for this question, I will answer that Asian Dub Foundation are always at the front of my mind. And actually, they listened to the podcast episode and they retweeted it and they commented,
nice.
and they said something. They said, "Oh, thank you for this, and please, we could help out." But anytime I feel, and it's election day today, local elections in the UK, not everywhere, but in a lot of places, and every time I feel frustrated or I feel low or I feel like I can't make sense of something, or I need an uplift, I will go and listen to a number of their albums or songs to really lift me up and let me reflect on my culture as well.
Nice. You see, this is awesome. Because that, for me, that week, that month we had with the music thing, that has been my favorite of all the episodes you've done. I don't know, you always have a music guy, and you had some awesome guests on there, and how even your playlist and how the music, is used to boost people's mental health and all that stuff. Musicians don't realize it, but we play a very big role in people's lives as well, which is kind of ironic because we're talking about mental health, but then musicians help people with their mental health as well. So this is very, very cool. All right, then. Now let's talk. This is something I don't think we've ever talked about, but how did you get into the mental health industry? And if you could tell our listeners that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you use the term mental health industry, because I guess it is an industry now. And when I started getting into it, wasn't necessarily an industry. And I think it's fascinating for me to think about myself as part of an industry, because I don't really. So that in itself has been an illuminating way to view it. But I went in 2011, I attended a mental health first aid course through a voluntary organisation because my workplace at the time refused to fund any training. And I was on lots of community lists. So I managed to get on this course, and it was a 2-day course all about mental health that I now run. And I remember being completely blown away by this course, because it actually enabled me to see things for what they were. And I didn't realize that certain things in my life and other people's life were actually as a result of having disorders or mental ill health, and how we have to think about our mental health in a really proactive way. And so then when I went on to get my job at Imperial College in London, I asked if I could trained to be an instructor to train people in this course? And I was told yes. And I ran 2 courses that summer. It was summer 2013, one for 8 people and one for 9 people. And then from that point, there was no return. The courses were full. And I suppose that's how I got into it. So it was through being a trainer, through being an instructor, and other organizations started to find out about it. And that's kind of how my business grew. And that's how I am where I am today. But also a really key part for me, thinking about mental health, Savvy, and we've talked about this a lot, we're from different cultures, but we are part of the global majority, is how global majority, diaspora, Black communities, the way in which we need to talk about mental health and also recover from mental ill health is going to be different to what is set as a standard of the white majority. Now, of course, within white cultures as well, there's going to be a huge difference in culture and how people talk or don't talk about mental health and mental ill health. But I think as global majority, diaspora, Black communities, we also really need to consider how our cultures provide healing mechanisms. And a lot of that will be through music, will be through collective dance, will be through song, will be through spiritual song, how that can help our mental health and well-being. So I suppose that's a little glimpse into how it happens and how that journey continues.
That's so cool, man. And for anyone listening, obviously I produced Leyla's podcast, and I have to mention, awesome mental health podcast. Like, we're doing something very, very different on there. It's an award-winning podcast, by the way. So yeah, I have to plug that in there. You should definitely check it out, the Diverse Minds podcast, by the way. So yeah, I really like that. I really like that you emphasize the global majority, and even in I'm not in a position to speak about our people, but mental health, we don't really talk about it like that. In fact, it was until I moved to this country, to the UK, that it became a thing. Back then, it's kind of stigmatized in where I'm originally from, but which is very cool here, because there's a lot of things that I look back at how we treated some people back then, and I could point to, these people were going through this. You probably shouldn't have done that way. So I really like that approach. How has it been for you, though, being working in that industry? How do you find it?
Yeah, so I suppose again, going back to that word industry, maybe I think of myself more as an educationalist and thinking about how to empower people and give them the tools to have the conversations. And I do really steer clear from giving any medical advice, any counseling advice, any psychotherapy or therapy advice, because that is not my background. Really, for me, it's about what are the practical, common sense things that we can do in the workplace to create mentally healthy environments for ourselves and for other people. And also within our communities and our families and our friendship circles, how can we be okay with having the conversations and supporting people with the routes they want to take? So I think in some places it's been received really well, and in other places I think with all of this work, Savvy, it's always a journey. I don't know if we ever get to the end point, but it's understanding that things are going to change. We've had COVID, we've had a global pandemic, we've had people not being able to grieve their loved ones using their cultural rights. Now we've got cost of living crisis. The sad reality is, and I wish it were not the case, we are going to see an increase of suicides. And that's horrific. And then, of course, for every one suicide, you're impacting around 200 people because of the loss, the grief, the connection. So sadly, I don't think we ever reach the end of the road, but we have to be thinking about this all the time and not seeing it as, oh, it's really nice and fluffy. And I say, a lot of workplaces, we talk about, oh, this is the proverbial fruit bowl. Have some fruit. There's a fruit bowl in our communal kitchen. But really, it's much more than that. It's thinking about, how do people like to work? What's empowering? Someone's going on maternity leave, paternity leave. How do we have the conversations to make sure, are they okay? Maybe, they're probably really happy about having a child, but that doesn't mean you don't have flux and change and have to change your environment. Equally, I know, with your podcast, it's all about music makers. And if, that's a passion and they love doing it, that doesn't mean that things are going to be smooth sailing or easy for them or, not being recognized. Everyone has some kind of story with rejection, and that's all going to be quite triggering and impact on people's mental health.
That's so cool. I like that you mentioned that, because I speak to a lot of musicians, and like I was saying, there's a lot of there's more challenges than wins in the music industry. In fact, the wins are rare. Very, very few people. So a lot of artists sometimes tell me what they struggle with this industry. I had one tell me that he cries sometimes at night. I
Mm-hmm.
have a very good friend who's just battling ups and downs with the this thing, which is kind of like what the purpose of this podcast is. Because I wanted to bring you on to see if we could help. If there's anything we could help, any tips we could share in terms of that. But we'll get there though. But I want to, as you were talking, I was thinking, especially when I create your show notes, sometimes I get confused between mental health and mental well-being. Like, is there a
Mm-hmm.
difference between these two? And how would you explain this to a new artist?
Yeah, I mean, I think the terms can definitely overlap if we think
Okay.
about a Venn diagram.
Okay.
So I would say that mental health is the health of your mind, and everyone has mental health. So often we hear people using the term mental health when actually they're talking about mental ill health. But
Hmm.
in essence, mental health is our emotional and psychological state of mind. And when we feel mentally well, we can do the things we want to do, we can manage stress effectively, and we can create, form, and sustain all the different sorts of relationships and connections we have in our life.
Hmm.
So if we think that's mental health, and I think if we think about well-being as an overall picture or mental well-being, we need to think of it maybe as an umbrella. And you've got mental well-being and physical well-being, which creates an overall picture of well-being. Now, mental well-being, yes, of course it overlaps, but we need to think about it in terms of being proactive. How do we look after the state of our mind? So how do we look after the state of our emotional and psychological well-being? What are the things that we do? And also bearing in mind that our mental well-being will be, of course, it will be influenced by external factors. So if we go through redundancy, or if we have a really difficult time at work, or if something really great happens to us, that's all going to have an impact on our mental well-being. So I think the two terms can be used absolutely interchangeably. Because of stigma and the mental institutions, and because people often use the term mental to mean something crazy, but it has those connotations, that mental well-being can be seen as a much more encompassing positive term than mental health. But I like to think of it as you've got the umbrella and you've got the mental health and physical health, and well-being being everything being well and in harmony and synchronicity. And that doesn't mean it will be exactly the same for everyone. So you might have a diagnosed mental health condition, you may be taking medication, you may be going for therapy, you may be no, you'll have ups and downs, but you are managing that condition in the way that is empowering and right for you.
Hmm. Interesting. Very, very, very. That explains a lot, actually. Now that I think about it, because like I said, sometimes I don't know if I should do mental health or mental well-being, but that explains a lot. As you were talking, though, I'm thinking, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are going through or that have mental health. Is it right to say mental health issues or symptoms or whatever?
Yeah,
You
or
know,
mental ill health, periods of mental ill
Period.
health. Yeah.
Health, yeah. Is there, what are certain things that, let's say I was somebody that was dealing with certain issues. Could you explain some of the symptoms of mental ill health or some of the issues that you go through?
Yeah, so I think sort of typical things, it depends. And I think the old classifications of mental health, or I guess people think about it in two ways. So there's depression and anxiety that sits on one side, and then things like bipolar and psychosis and schizoaffective disorders on not another side, but it is almost like this. So you've got the lower level managing things, and things that are thought to be higher level,
Hmm.
or more that need more input potentially. But again, I think as a society, if we're constantly talking about it, keeping an eye on people, and we have proactive ways, people are less likely to become really, really unwell. Not all of it is in anyone's control, but I think it's important to remember that. But generally, what I would say when people are maybe not their mental optimum is some of the key signs. And if we think about stress, and most of us will have experienced some kind of stress in our life, it might be that we start to feel quite low. Our sleeping patterns are normally disturbed, so
Mm,
we can't sleep very well, or we're sleeping in the day and not sleeping at night. Things that once brought us enjoyment don't really seem to bring us enjoyment in the same way anymore.
mm,
Particularly if someone is experiencing or likely to experience depression, they may feel very numb, that they can't engage with things. So they see things going on around them, but they feel almost very isolated, not wanting to connect with people. With anxiety, you might actually see an increase in work performance or increase in doing things because it's very anxious and people have a lot of adrenaline and cortisol and they keep going and they
mm,
keep going, and then it's the crash.
mm,
If people are having unusual sensory experiences, they might be hearing voices, they might be
mm,
tasting food and really believing it's poisoned,
mm,
unusual beliefs that they're being watched or spied upon. Those are the signs when things have really gone to a level that's very disturbing for that individual. So I'm not saying that having mental ill health is wrong in and of itself. I think what we need to really be aware of is that people are struggling and they're in distress. That's the concern. Because yes, people can have anxiety or an anxiety disorder and live a very healthy life and very happy lives if they know their triggers. But of course, if people are hearing distressing voices that are really, really causing a lot of pain and anguish, that's why that needs to be given attention and be helped. Also things like eating disorders, big bigorexia, where men have a kind of muscular body dysmorphia. They generally, men, not exclusively, they think I need to keep going to the gym, I need to keep going to the gym. And often when that happens and it keeps happening because there's a lot of strain that goes on the body, it can be too late. So it's how we sort of spot these signs. And it's not to say to someone, oh, you've lost weight or you look really muscly, but it's to say, you know what, how are you? What's happening for you at the moment? All right, whenever you're ready to talk, I'm here to listen. And it's those sorts of things that we can do.
mm. That is very, very interesting. Sad to say that I know certain people that kind of fit or are displaying
Mm.
symptoms of that. You know, that's really sad. Unfortunately, now that I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, what can somebody do? Say you spot someone displaying symptoms of the certain symptoms you talked about. Actually, before we do that, yeah, I want to talk about some of the causes of this. You've
Mm-hmm.
mentioned one, which is stress. And I know some of my audience, especially from their workplace, are super stressed. Especially with the music, all that stuff. Could you list some other things that cause mental health symptoms? I guess.
Yeah, so I think, anything when it comes out of kilter in life can cause mental ill health
Mm,
or for us not to be in our mental optimum, right? So it could be too much work, it could be
mm,
workloads, it could be relationship challenges with, a partner, but a manager, a child, family members, caring responsibilities. Um, Too much to juggle, caring for younger dependents, older dependents, really anything, moving house, having a baby, any kind of change can create us to not feel our mental optimum.
mm,
Medication, grief, bereavement, all sorts of things can create, circumstances where our mental health may not be its optimum and we may develop mental ill health.
interesting. That's a very broad range. And in fact, I'm sure, is it fair to say that every human being on earth is suffering with some form of mental health issue?
I mean, I think if we think over our lifetimes, it's
Mm,
highly, highly unlikely that, 99, you can't spend 99.9% of your life without some kind of challenges. So I
yeah.
think it's absolutely fair to say it's thought to be, depression is thought to be one of the biggest public health issues globally. So it's
Mm,
thought that at any one time, 1 billion people will be experiencing what the West would classify as clinically, they could be clinically diagnosed with depression. Now, of course, if we look at, world reference points and world frameworks, it actually is, it won't be looked at the same way. Something I failed to mention, of course, is bullying, trauma, abuse, recovery from sexual abuse, and, all of that. And again, people's journey through recovery might be up and down. So
mm,
yes, they might have a period where they feel really well, and then they might have a period where they don't feel so good. So all of that, is going to contribute to mental health and well-being, or lack of mental health and well-being. So I think, remember that throughout our life we will experience ups and downs, and that's completely normal. And to wake up every single day, just like with our physical health, I don't think that very few people wake up every day feeling 100% physically optimum, exactly the same as can be said for our mental well-being and mental health.
Anyway, so let's jump right into the one now that I think is super, super important, because I know I could list 3 artists in my mind right now I know are struggling with mental health issues. One, lack of motivation, stress, whatever. What are some things that they could do to improve how they feel or to get them to start feeling better?
So there's so many tips, aren't there, Zavi? Because with my guests, I always ask them a question at the end of the show, don't I? And I say, what are your top 3 mental health tips? And tips that, what do you do for your mental well-being? And everyone's are slightly different. But I think some of the commonalities is, number one, is always try and find a way to move your body. Because I think when we move our bodies, we start to distract our minds and we focus on our physical body. And it gives us some space to take away from our maybe constant rumination or things that are going on. So it could be, I always talk about this, it could be going having your cup of tea or coffee outside, listening to some bird song, marching on the spot, put your favorite music on and just dance around the room, go for a walk. If you run, go for a run, do a video class, something to get your body moving. And I think that just helps get us out of our head. The second thing is, and it's so much easier said than done, because I think it's a really, really difficult thing to talk about, but just find someone to talk to. And that person that you find to talk to about what's going on for you, they don't have to give advice, they don't have to provide the answers, but it's knowing that you can just talk and download and have someone there to listen who's not going to judge you and is going to say, it's okay, this is, you're not on your own, lots of people feel like this and I'm here for you. Now, if you don't have that person in your life, do remember we are very lucky in the UK that we have lots of charities. So the Samaritans, or if you have a look on hubforhope.co.uk and type in your postcode, you will find a list of resources in your area, because I know it can be very difficult to talk to people and people that you know. Sometimes it's much easier to talk to strangers, but just talk to someone, even if you know they may not have the answers. And often we think, well, what are they going to do for me? And that might be the case, but sometimes when we vocalize things, we can really get things off our chest because we're social creatures. And then I think the third thing is to just, I think this is something that you talk about, Zavi, that, you know, if you can find something that you really love, and ideally, you know, I understand your listeners are looking to break into the industry to make money, to create some kind of livelihood from their creative craft, but to not give up on that creative craft. And that's what Mike Kiss talked about that in his episode, The Drum and Bass Musician. He experienced anxiety. It took him 20 years to recover, and he talked about that in the latest podcast. But he said he didn't give up on the music, even if, and I asked him the question, you know, if people want to do this, but they're really worried or they think they're rubbish, he said it doesn't matter, just like be in your bedroom or be in a space, and if you play one bar of music, if you just do one thing, knowing that you've created that and just really kind of sit in that and relish that, and you don't have to share it with anyone, and then from that you build it up and you do it day by day. And I think, you know, setting yourself really small goals as well, so maybe no one wants to see it, or you think, oh, I don't want to show it to anyone, that's fine, but don't let go of that. And remember, just, you know, find the thing that works for you to have your creative outlet. And maybe you're sick of music for a while, go and write a poem, or go and do some doodling, or something that enables you to express yourself.
Those are awesome tips. I really like that. In fact, I could actually use some for myself as well sometimes. But yeah, those are wonderful tips. I truly appreciate it. I didn't expect anything less, man. You really giving us some awesome tips in this and really dive deeper into this mental health thing. I like how you explain the difference between mental health and mental well-being. That is super important. Sure, my listeners will appreciate this. Anyway, at this point, we've come to the end of an awesome chat. And at this stage, I'd like to ask for one final tip from, I mean, you've given so many, but I'd like to ask for one final. It doesn't have to be related to mental health, but if you could share one tip with a new artist just starting out on their journey, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, because I feel like I am sadly not in that musical world. I wish I were, but from musician friends, and you know, we've got a Let's Dance International Festival happening at the moment. What I've seen is in the creative field is that people finding support from each other, so knowing that they're not alone. So I think for me it would be, what is your creative collective, your jam group? Who do you want to have that jamming space with, whether it's verbal, whether it's creative, whether it's musical, whether it's people you go to see other gigs with, it doesn't matter. But I think it's that you're independent, but we have to be interdependent and not completely reliant and enmeshed on people. But we can't be solo stars in our own orbits, if you like, although stars don't really orbit, but you know what I mean. But I think that's it. I think it's that, how do you find that the self within the collective, and who is your collective, and how do you support each other and finding that reciprocity?
Brilliant. Leyla, that's been awesome, man. It's been an awesome chat. If any of our listeners is watching this and thinking, you know what, I want to check out more of what she's doing and learn more about her, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love you to connect to, check out the Diverse Minds podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, and wherever else you get your podcasts from. You can also find me on Twitter. My handle is @DiverseMindsUK. On LinkedIn, so I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I don't know if that's really where musicians hang out, but but it's at my name, so Leyla, Leyla Okhai, Okhai. And we also have a Diverse Minds podcast page on Instagram. So again, that's just Diverse Minds podcast, where we have little snippets. So if you want to have a taster, you can listen to us there. And yeah, I also love to hear from you. So if you listen to an episode, I also have something called Speak Pipe, where you can leave me an anonymous or non-anonymous voicemail and let me know what you think of the show. So yeah, I'd really love to hear from you. If you contact me, I always reply myself.
Brilliant. Leyla, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. I truly appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, Zavi. So, really happy to be here with you and share some thoughts with your listeners. And I really hope that's been useful.